Daniel, it's such a joy to have you here. It's been a year and a half, I believe, or something like that. I've had the pleasure of interviewing you some time ago, and also to meet you in person at a conference that was organized by a common friend of ours. And yeah, I think it's a great opportunity to come back on the last few years, on what happened with you. But before that, maybe you can share with us your testimony, who you are, and what you would like to share with us today.
Yeah. Thank you, Augustine. It's feels really good to be here with you, just like it was last time. And I so appreciate the space that you hold and just the work that you do in this area. And you've become a really dear friend, a dear brother. I'm very grateful for you, and for others as well. Yeah, I suppose this is an interview for my new initiative, which is Survivor's Story. I think this footage may be used elsewhere as well. And I guess I really wanted to have the first interview on the website or on the YouTube channel to be my own story, partly so it gets buried quite quickly with other interviews that come after it, but also it just feels right that I try and lead by example and show, express, share my own story, really. So it feels timely, and it feels that almost since we had our last interview that a full circle has occurred, and feel in a really good place actually, and more healed than I was before, and more able to share and talk about. And in some ways it's going to be more difficult because so much has happened and it's made it harder to talk about, I think. But also I'm in a better place than I was, so hopefully those balance each other out. Yeah.
So I just want to welcome every part of you. I really admire your authenticity, your courage for speaking out, and also your leadership, showing the way to many men, but also women who might need what you have to share.
Thank you, brother. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a real honor, to be interviewing you today. And please share what you'd like to.
Well, I'll just touch on other men actually quickly before we get into it. I've spoken over the last few years since my memories have returned of what happened to me as a child. I've spoken to many survivors, many women, but many men. And I personally assess that this type of abuse occurs against men or males or boys far more often than is often talked about, and maybe there aren't quite as many male survivors that come forward to talk about it as well, which can give a bit of a lopsided perspective of it as an issue. But I know so many men that have suffered this in one form or another. It is really heartbreaking, as it is for what happens to our sisters as well. But I guess, my brothers have a special place in my heart, especially my brothers and my sisters that have suffered this type of abuse. So I guess I'll start with just a bit about my background, really, just so people have a bit of a flavour of me. So my background is primarily security and military focused. I was formerly in a quite highly respected and regarded military force. It was considered elite, so not special forces, but not conventional forces, something in between. And I had a career in there of about 5.5 years. And then after that, I went on to work in the Middle East as a private contractor. And I've also worked in anti-piracy work, where we used to protect merchant ships and private vessels from Somalian pirates. I've also done bodyguarding, close protection work. I've looked after some very, very high profile people, and it was quite satisfying work. But what really caused me to move away from that kind of work, especially the stuff in the Middle East, was just coming to see the reasons that they'd said that we were there were not really the reasons that we were there, that it was much more about oil and money and power than it was about freeing or helping a people. And I had very strong ideas at that time of, I wanted to be a hero, I wanted to be helping people, I wanted to be making a positive difference in the world, while being quite a wounded and angry young man. And then coming to realise through a series of incidents really that, my gosh, I'm not on the side of the good guys here. I'm doing something that is really against my values and what I stand for. And that really shook me, but it did lead to me changing my direction. And it also started a spiritual process and me starting to move into spirituality and realising how wounded I was and starting to look for answers for why I carried so much pain, why I carried so much hurt that really was quite debilitating for much of my late teens, 20s, where I have my normal memory. I was beset with feelings of self-loathing, self-hatred, self-disgust, of suicidal ideation, of intense rage that at times made me feel like I wanted to destroy the world and everything in it. Hopeless despair, unending depression at times it felt like, and just really hating myself on a deep level, which started to shift as I begun the personal development work, the spiritual work that I started to do. And being the type of person that I am, when I do something, I do tend to do it quite intensely. So I dove into this new spirituality, or this new personal development work with the same intensity that I dived into the military, or that I dived into other jobs and careers that I've had. And so I think in some ways I progressed quite quickly and had quite big realizations and entered some really profound practices that had their blind spots but had really big benefits to them as well, and learned and grew and did a lot to heal the pain and the angst that I carried. Now, for what we're about to talk about, I had maybe one or two very small snippets leading up to 4 years ago when the memory started coming back. I had a couple of occasions where I'd maybe had some kind of very faint flashback of something happening to me as a child, something sexual of nature, something violatory of nature, but it would kind of come up and it went away very, very quickly. It wasn't anything that stuck with me. I forgot about it and just moved on with my life regardless. So that brings me to 4 years ago when the memory started coming back on this bedrock of intense spiritual, psychological, even therapy that had built up to this, but me kind of getting to a point where I felt I wasn't really progressing. I felt I tried almost everything and I hadn't been able to get to the root of what the problem was. And actually something I just remembered is back in about 2012, was deeply involved in this spiritual community in America, and I started actually having these shaking fits. And these shaking fits would normally occur if I was in a room on my own and I felt safe. And if I followed my intuition and locked the door, then it would normally start with my legs sort of bouncing up and down. But as I continued, and I knew enough from doing a lot of somatic work, a lot of somatic therapy, I would kind of just let go. I knew enough to trust it, to surrender to my body and to follow my body. And in doing so, it ended up with my whole body shaking, and then even like strange noises coming out of me, and then some images and things. But I would have these fits that would last up to 1-2 hours at a time. And that went on for a period of a couple of years. So 2012, 2013-ish. And one of them in particular stood out to me when I just had this intense feeling of something golden coming and taking me away from something truly, truly terrible that was happening. And I remember just feeling this overwhelming sense of an intelligence and a wisdom that was so far beyond me and so far beyond anything that I knew, that I was humbled and deeply appreciative of it, deeply moved that I was so protected. I'd also had an experience in about 2009 where I was undergoing Bowen therapy and laid on the Bowen table. They do these movements on your fascia and then they leave the room and leave you for these movements to take effect. And in this therapy, I remember I was laid on my front and I had this overwhelming feeling of somebody stood by my right shoulder, and then two things hit me at once. It was my grandfather, the spirit of my grandfather, and also that he had been with me for quite some time. Now, as we get into my story more, that will make more sense of its relevance really, but it just, at the time, it just made me burst into tears. And that there was somebody that had been watching over me, and that they'd been there for a long time. I mean, my grandfather killed himself when I was fairly young, in my teenage years, and I know that affected me profoundly, but to feel him with me was really, it was really beautiful. So that's quite a lot already. Do you want to unpack anything, or do you want to just keep going? Okay, I'll have a sip of coffee. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess that's the preamble out of the way.
Is there anything that you would like to unpack?
I don't think so. I mean, I trust your curiosity if there's anything that stood out to you. Mm-hmm. Does that feel like that gives enough of what came before, would you say?
I believe so. I think it would be interesting to kind of know what your childhood was like.
Right, okay, yeah, we can touch on that. My childhood, in my normal memory, is very strange because in my normal memory, nothing that bad happened, but I felt terrified. And I felt on edge the whole time. And I felt deeply unsafe. And I had to be this perfect little boy. And I had to survive in what felt like a very adverse environment. But if I remembered, all I remembered was stuff like the TV being broken, or being spanked, or being hit on occasion, or shouting and screaming, but nothing that bad. It was bad, but not that bad. And then other things that I'd become aware of from speaking to my mother was the idea that when I was a baby and I cried, nobody would come to me to soothe me because my father believed that would spoil me as a child. So that, I think, has created particular difficulties with attachment and feelings of abandonment and of being alone and not trusting that somebody's going to be there if I'm in difficulty. But that does remind me of another experience actually that I'll just share before the memories came back. And this was again sort of about 2009. I was undergoing an NLP and hypnosis training. And as part of the training, I underwent a timeline therapy, which is where you get induced into a hypnotic state, you visualize a timeline, and you go back in your timeline and you kind of zoom out, and then you kind of visualize a gestalt, a knot of experience that seems to be blocking your timeline, and then you zoom into it, you zoom out, you zoom into it, you zoom out, but the idea is that you reprocess it, you're freed of it, and then you're a better person as a result of that. Now in that timeline therapy, I went back to something that was 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days, 3 something was what I could glean information-wise. But as we zoomed in, I lost all awareness of what was going on in the hypnosis, in the hypnotic meditation-like practice. And all I can remember is I eventually came to, I was sat on this stool and I had these foot-long trails of snot hanging out of my nose, and I'd been crying like heart-rendingly intensely, and I felt deeply shaken. And I had the feeling that the facilitator was a little bit freaked out, like this wasn't a normal occurrence that had gone on. And from speaking to the other participant of the course, they were saying like, yeah, you know, the facilitator was struggling to get you out of the trance. They were doing all these weird things trying to get you out, but it wasn't working. And later that evening, when I went back to the accommodation, I called my mother and I asked her, like, look, Mum, did anything happen when I was 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months old that would have caused a particular trauma, or, you know, and she relayed an experience. Apparently, when I was a baby, my father was going to attack my mother, physically attack her, and she held me up as a human shield, as a newborn baby. Which for me, when she said it, I was like, what kind of mother holds their newborn baby up as a human shield, was one of the first thoughts that I had. But I didn't say it. I was trying to be considerate to my mother and was appreciating that she was disclosing something to me. But it did also seem a bit strange at the time, like that doesn't seem like a response. And I was also deaf for the first 2 years of my life. And I nearly died from tonsillitis when I was maybe 3, from like the most extreme case of tonsillitis the specialist had ever seen. So that's my childhood in a nutshell. Does that give a bit more?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand how you felt as a child.
Yeah.
So, and also to understand the family dynamics around you to kind of frame what you're going to be sharing.
Yeah, and that's maybe, thank you, Augustine, you're absolutely right. And there's one more thing that just popped into my head. So when I was about 12 or 13, my parents had been divorced and my dad had a nice big house in a particular area. And I just remember that I was there one day and I saw him come out of the shower, or not come out of the shower, he came out of the shower room, and he didn't see me, but I saw him. He was naked. He would have, I guess you would call a semi-erect penis. And I just remember it freaked me the hell out. I basically didn't see my dad for about 2 years after that. I relayed to my stepsister that I felt like he was controlling me and taking over my life and killing my soul and all this really extreme descriptive language, when all I'd done is see him get naked out of the shower. But it really freaked me out. It really freaked me out in a way that I couldn't quantify. But it did mean that I didn't see him for a couple of years after that, and we eventually got back in touch when my life invariably fell apart, as it tended to. But yeah, that's, now looking back, that stands out to me as a particular point of interest. Yeah.
So your memories arrived when you were what age, and what are the years that you kind of remembered as a flash, just so people have a bit of a timeline.
Got you.
In terms of your experience?
Yeah, so my memories started coming back in the year 2020, so about 4 years ago. It was halfway through 2020, so yeah, roughly about 4 years ago. And the ages that it ranged from could be, I mean, I don't know, because there was confusion and there was psychosis that came in at some point. And there was my mind extrapolating and cascading out and making it that everybody had abused me and that abuse had been going on forever. But the closest, most accurate read that I can get on it is that the main abuse would have happened from a very young age, from when I was young enough to smell like the same as a baby. So from a very young age to 12, 13 would be my rough guess.
And so before we unpack your testimony in that regard, I think it would be interesting to understand what psychosis is for you in terms of what you've experienced, and how to differentiate psychosis from real memories.
This is brilliant, yeah. It's a brilliant point. So I think actually a lot of survivors suffer with psychosis at some point, actually. I think it's a really natural side effect of suffering CSA or SRA. I think it makes it even worse for survivors, because then the self-doubt, the self-loathing, all these things become louder and become stronger. But when my memories started coming back, they weren't just normal memories. I relived it through my body. So if you were to see me, it would be as if you were watching a really bad porn film with invisible actors, with just me rolling about being raped. So I relived it through my body, with my whole body arching, my jaw feeling like it's being wrenched open, my arms being held in a position and feeling intense shakes, convulsions, heat, cold, emotion, all these things. So some people will call these somatic memories, or somatic flashbacks is what they can be called in the therapeutic world. But often there wasn't any, it was like my mind was blank, but I'm reliving and watching myself. You know, after a while, it's like, God, you're obviously being raped, but what's going on? When is this? How is this? Who is this? And that data isn't necessarily apparent, especially immediately. So my psychosis came about by, in some ways, me on some level of my awareness or consciousness trying to find the answers to who and to what was going on. As I relived and these memories unfolded, I would get some flashes or faces or data that was through my mind, not just of my body. But then as that went on, over time, I started to lose my critical voice, like my ability to be like, is that really possible? Could that have happened? How likely is that? So my critical voice really receded, and I just started following data that came out of my head, that poured out of my head. And it became a snowball rolling downhill. And then it seems there's some kind of mechanism, and it's not just in my head, I've spoke to other survivors, and there's some kind of mechanism that can be some kind of self-authoring, story-making, fantastical thing. But as I look back on it, and for what I understand about psychosis now, psychosis is really a way to provide a narrative for something that's unbearable. So we create stories, or we create narratives about ourselves, or about what happened, or about who did what to us, as a way of bearing something that is actually incredibly unbearable and overwhelming. So for me, what I say I believe to be true, that is when the data from my mind or what I've relived has come through so clearly, so powerfully, so overwhelmingly and so repeatedly that I'm just like, I couldn't have made that up. Like, how could I have made that up? And there's some really unbelievable stuff and extreme stuff that we're going to be hearing in my testimony. And some of the extreme stuff is going to sound unbelievable. And maybe it is psychosis, but I've arrived at a place with myself after going full circle with this where I believe what we're going to talk about is true. And there's a lot that we'll touch on as well, hopefully, that is of the psychosis that I can give an example. Something I noticed with the more psychotic delusions that I had is there was less emotional content. I felt less emotionally. It was more just almost like a story playing out. Whereas the stuff that I believe to be real, I mean, I was bereft, I was overwhelmed, I was suicidal, it just had more volume to it. Does that answer?
Yeah, it does. I'm just wondering if psychosis is a way to label something that we don't fully understand.
Totally.
And therefore, some people might be labeled with psychosis simply because they are uttering things that are unbelievable for the world, and that they might have a basis of truth, but it is so difficult to express it that the mind kind of paints something around it to make it more palatable.
And more palatable to the self. There's stuff that I relived that on the first round I relived it, but then it kind of came round and I relived it again, but then it had a new layer of story and a new layer of meaning. And I think there's a cyclical nature there's a beginning and an end to my story, but I think it's actually the same event. But it was relived as two separate events, but the second one was the same thing, but very fantastical with otherworldly beings and all kinds of stuff. But I think it's actually what we're going to talk about.
Yeah. So just before we do talk about it, and I think this can be part one, and then maybe we can pause and do part two, and maybe give a trigger warning as well.
Oh God.
On this first part, I think it's really important to just to be a survivor. From what I have seen from other survivors, it's very difficult to believe and to be believed. And so I just want to maybe caution like you rightly said about having the critical mind to kind of question and try to maybe find elements of reality that can confirm or deny your memories. That way, I think it kind of grounds you into reality, but at the same time, perhaps not let people put labels on you too quickly. And
the importance of, as a survivor, really trusting in your experience. Like the exact and abusers and even some professionals are very good at using the impreciseness of the recollection as a reason to discredit it. But normally the theme of what is being remembered is true. The specifics may have gone into psychosis, may have gone into fantasy or delusion, but we are talking about the most heinous crime imaginable. We are talking about the ultimate violation of spirit, of body, of mind. we are talking about the ultimate betrayal, that at an age where you're not even designed to do it with consent. So yeah, it's a really excellent point, Augustine. Yeah, to survivors, yes, try and ground it in reality, but balance that, nuance it with having belief in yourself, with trusting your experiences, with maybe understanding that what you're experiencing isn't factually real, but the underlying thread is real. So it happened, just some of the details that you're recalling may be confused, and they may change, and that's okay. But find people that can support you in that can have some belief, that can have some nuance, and that can have some critical thought. A lot of people will just be critical, and it is the most painful, overwhelming, undermining thing in the world. So please just protect yourself from that. The other thing that I want to touch on for survivors is it's quite common for survivors to compare ourselves. It's very natural for us to discredit what it is that we went through. And I've done it myself, because there's other survivors I know of that have had stories way worse than mine. And then who am I to complain? Who am I to feel bad? Who am I to feel suicidal or whatever, when this person's had it so much worse? But I think we need to understand that all suffering is relative, that the nature of this beast that we're going to talk about is so terrible that no matter the severity of it, it is enough to break mind, body, soul. It is enough to traumatize you for the rest of your life if you don't work at it. It is enough to turn your life into a living nightmare. And that could be from something that's considered, relatively minor. Okay, so just please don't fall into the trap of comparing. We are all brothers and sisters here. And as far as I'm concerned, every single one of us is a hero. Whether you can relate to that or believe that yourself, that's okay. But from my perspective, you're a hero. I'm a hero. Others like us are heroes.
I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think so. Brother. Yeah.
There's just one more thing I'd like to touch on before we enter the disclaimer part of your testimony. You mentioned that some of your memories came back through hypnotherapy, and some people who discredit survivors would say that hypnotherapy can implant memories into you.
Yeah.
What would you say about that? Just because I want people to be able to give their full attention to what you're going to be sharing next, without having this thought, but he did hypnotherapy, so...
Okay, yeah. So I didn't really have memories come back from hypnotherapy. It was just that one being held up as a human shield as a baby that was confirmed from an outside source, that came up as a result of a timeline hypnotic procedure. But yeah, I think many therapists, many decent therapists, whether they be a hypnotherapist or a counsellor or whatever, are very cautious about being suggestive or implanting ideas in a victim, in a survivor. And rightly so, because the mind can be very suggestible, especially if you've undergone this type of abuse, which includes conditioning and its own form of hypnosis for the victim under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. So probably not answering that very well, but yeah, be cautious of alternative forms of therapy, be cautious of conventional therapy. But as I said, that balance of critical mind, that balance of belief and trust in your experience, and that balance of trying to hold some nuance, not letting yourself go to one extreme or the other of absolutism. And I think if you can walk that path, it will be as bearable a path as possible. And you know, I'm deeply committed to truth. You are. You know, we want the truth. I want the truth more than anything. And this is the closest that I've been able to get to it, basically.
Would you like us to pause here and do another section, or just continue on this one?
Well, I think the other section could be on what happens afterwards with me getting into trouble and that kind of thing.
Okay.
That could be the second part.
So you don't want to talk about what happened to you?
I do, yeah, but okay. I think that, oh yeah. So now we talk about
the
disclaimer stuff, these severe stuff.
But it's just you want it to be in the same...
Yeah, I think so.
Okay,
I think so. But I guess we can make disclaimers of, we're going to be talking about extreme CSA, extreme SRA, torture, murder, worse. So just, you know, if you're a survivor yourself in particular, just please bear that in mind. Take appropriate care of yourself. Moderate how much you watch, or take a break, or don't watch it at all. Just please take care of yourself. And just to let you know as well, as another disclaimer, I'm really okay. I'm in probably the best I've ever been in my life. I've done a huge amount of work to try and work through and resolve this. So I'm okay. I just want you to know that I'm okay. And very grateful actually for this time, this space, and for the Brotherhood making it possible.
Thank you.
I can roll. So it began 4 years ago, and with me coming to an end of alternative therapies, thinking that can help me, I turned to something else, which was MDMA therapy. Now, I underwent this therapy with the intention of resolving PTSD, or complex PTSD, which I believed I had at that point. But on the very first session that I had with the underground therapist, with a facilitator, to start with, you don't have any caffeine or any additives in the 24 hours leading up to the treatment. Had a walk beforehand, like an integration or a preparation walk with the facilitator to just prepare and talk through the medicine and how it works. And then it's all set up. You lie down, put on a blindfold, you drink. I drank the MDMA, and then you lie down, there's music that is on, and you're kind of there just waiting for the medicine, as they might call it, to take effect. Now it's very high grade MDMA when it's used therapeutically, so it's like overnight 95% pure, and it's used intentionally. So it's very important you have an intention. So my intention when I underwent therapy was to find out why I kept failing at manifesting what I wanted to create in the world. So what is it that keeps blocking me? What is it that stops me? You know, and I figured it was partly my trauma, which is why I knew it would get to the trauma, the PTSD. But that was the intention I came into with the MDMA therapy. Now, I was laid there on my back, and in later videos I'll be releasing the treatments of MDMA so that you guys can see it. You can make of it what you will, but those will be published as well. But in that first treatment, I was laid there, and after a while I just started basically and I was just making this noise and this noise and this noise, and then after however many minutes it changed, and it was like a gargling kind of like I can't even make the noise, but almost like a chainsaw kind of noise. And I was going through it, and I was like, maybe this is me having my tonsils out, or maybe this is some kind of operation I had as a kid, or was the thoughts I was having as I was re-experiencing it. But then the noises died down, and I was laid there for a while, and then just as if my body was kind of a bit controlled by strings, I just felt myself move into these different positions, and I started convulsing or moving in a particular way, and it took me a while to figure out what was going on, to be honest. Probably took at least an hour of me rolling around in these different positions that actually was quite obvious to look at. But then it just kind of dawned on me of like, wow, I'm being raped. Like, I'm reliving being raped. It was, you know, like I was laid on my front with my legs splayed, with my hands in front of me like this. And I was like, yeah, no, my hands are tied. Like, my hands are tied together. And there's one behind me, and he's doing something to my jaw, and I could feel it. It's like there's something that's forcing my jaw open. It's like it's some kind of belt. And I would just get these feeling senses over, like, the therapy goes on for 6 hours. So I was there for 6 hours. It didn't stop for 6 hours. I was laid there rolling about, all these different positions, just reliving being raped again and again. And the feeling sense that I had was like, okay, God, there's maybe 3 men here that are raping me. And the feeling sense that I had was like, okay, this is actually quite vicious. And the feeling sense that I had was like, by the end of the 6 hours, I was like, I think I must have been under 10 years old. I must have been under 10 years old was what I got. Like, I didn't have anything concrete, but just how my body felt, the way that the invisible spectres kind of felt in size, the fear that I felt, I was just able to kind of extrapolate, yeah, I think I'm under 10 years old. But what was quite interesting with these MDMA treatments, I had 3 of these MDMA treatments, so it didn't stop. It went, the MDMA treatment finished, we had some soup, we had a chat, we had an integration talk about it. But then when I went and laid down upstairs, it kept on happening, and it happened all through the night. I was in the spare room, and I was laid on my front, basically reliving being raped. You know, it was really distressing. I mean, I'm not saying I'm a tough guy, but I'm a fairly capable and competent, or, you know, I've been through hardship and I've had arduous things happen to me, you know, like I'm not like a shrinking violet, is that the right phrase? You know, but I was shook by this. This was, it felt overwhelming, and it felt like, what's happening to me? And like, why is this happening to me? And how did this happen to me? And how did I forget that this happened to me, if this happened to me? But another thing that hit me as well was, all of a sudden, I was like, oh my fucking God, no wonder I have felt so shit my entire life. Like, all of a sudden, it just made sense. And I was able to have the perspective very quickly of like, my God, you went through this as a boy. At this point, I just thought I was being raped by 3 men with a belt. But I was like, you poor kid, like what a hero you were to go through that. And no wonder you struggled your whole life. No wonder, you know, I'd done work on myself, so I was able to adopt that position relatively quickly. No wonder you've hated yourself and felt so disgusted with yourself. Look what they did to you. So I was able to self-parent myself quite quickly, which was a godsend, literally a godsend. But yeah, taking that position helped me navigate through, really. And it continued through the night, and it got really bad at one point. And then at one point, I basically started growling. There was something in my mouth at this point. So they were raping me in both ends. Then he would take it out of my mouth, like the belt would be here, or the belt would be in my mouth, pulling back. They would be pulling me back as if I was some kind of horse. But I just remember I was growling. I was fucking growling. And I was saying, I'll kill you. I'll fucking kill you. I'll kill you. I'll kill you. Again and again and again, over and over and over again. And in the way that I was growling, there's a part of me that's come up in therapy before, or that's come up in other spiritual work that I've done, that I would call Wolf. So I kind of knew Wolf was there. And I kind of knew the wolf was there to protect me, and that he was, as it got to its worst, that he was there to protect me. I also had like voice impressions come from somewhere that was saying, look, if you don't cooperate, you little shit, we're going to go next door to your brother, and we're going to do this to your brother, who will probably be more compliant than you. Words to that effect. And I just remember I was there growling, and I was just saying, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to fucking kill you. Now, I'm not sure if in reality, when they were raping me, that's what I was actually doing. I don't know. That could have just been going on one level of my experience. It may not have been directly expressed. Maybe it was repressed and it was coming out now. Maybe I was just terrified and frozen and taking it as a child would likely do in that situation. But Wolf felt pretty real, and it felt really clear he was there protecting me. I felt very grateful for him, actually, as I was reliving this. So that was the first MDMA treatment. Jump in at any point if there's anything you want to ask, brother.
Yeah, so just on this MDMA treatment,
yeah.
What is the general experience that people would have doing an MDMA treatment?
God. Yeah.
Is this something that would come up for most people, or is this quite particular to your story?
I think it's quite particular to my story. I hadn't really heard. I'd asked about, I'd looked online to what people's typical stories were, and most people would have an encounter with a spirit or work through some kind of karmic pain, but I hadn't heard anything like this. So this was unprecedented for me. I had done some research into it beforehand, but yeah, does that answer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's really important just to frame and to show people that, because people might think, oh, MDMA, this is what happens when you take MDMA, but actually it's really your experience that shows up, and that medicine which allows that experience to be relived, I think.
Yeah, two things. The way the medicine was described to me is like, because I have in years gone by considered ayahuasca, but whenever I'd imagined taking it, I'd always imagine myself hurting myself while I was taking it. So I just knew it wasn't the right medicine for me. Just intuitively I knew. And then the way my underground therapist described it to me is, look, ayahuasca is quite a harsh medicine. The good thing with MDMA is it both relaxes you, creates lots of warmth and lots of safety, but it also creates stimulation, so you don't just go comatose and just lie there blissed out. And that combination of warmth and of safety, I believe, is what provided me enough to open the door in my mind or in my body to start experiencing this. Like, it was horrifying, but it made complete sense to me at the same time. It was a complete mystery, but on some level I was like, I know this.
So how does that experience connect with your reality in terms of your surroundings, your relationship to those particular people today, in relation to your brother, in relation to those men that may have been there?
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably better after the third MDMA thing, sure. If that's okay, because it will just contextually make a bit more sense. Happy for me to roll on?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so had the MDMA therapy. I had about 5 weeks before the next therapy. I basically experienced a massive breakdown, and then being in just PTSD symptoms for like 5 weeks, and me just praying, begging, waiting for the next therapy session to come so that I could just process and get stuff moving again. I had one process at home where I did an exercise to call in evolved and healed ancestors, and I had about a 40-minute process on my own without MDMA therapy that was incredibly intense, that almost had me vomiting from the intensity of what I was feeling and the constriction and it was horrible. And I just remember feeling like, that's enough, I'm gonna wait for the MDMA therapy for me to go through this. So that briefly is the in-between. And then the second MDMA therapy is where it gets extreme, really. But really what we've already talked about, I think, is quite extreme. Yeah, I'll just have a sip of coffee. Yeah, is there anything before we go into the second?
No.
Second treatment, no. Yeah, so the second treatment happened much the same as the first one. Had a pre-walk beforehand, laid down, took the medicine. I remember actually I had a talk with the facilitator and I was saying, look, please trust me. And she was saying, I'm gonna trust you, but I'm gonna jump in if I feel I need to. And I was like, yeah, no, look, if you need to jump in, that's fine, but I need you to trust me in this. But she didn't really, the feeling I had was she didn't really trust me. She didn't really have a frame of reference for what was happening. And she seemed to think there was something underneath this that I needed to get to. And for me, it was like, no, this is it. This is what I've been looking for my whole life. This is the reason that there's something wrong with me. I felt that so clearly. But we were a bit misaligned going into that second treatment, I remember. But I took the second treatment. I took the second MDMA treatment. I laid down again, put the blindfold on, the music was playing. And it happened much more quickly this time, pretty quickly. I felt like it had all been stirred up already. I just started rolling around, reliving being raped again. But the setting was different. I could tell it was a different time. I could tell it was a different place with some different people. And I guess the main theme of this was there was one person that had control of me. I seemed to have a handler who was raping me. So I was rolling around, reliving being raped, but I was really aware that there were other people there that were watching. I could feel them, I could sense them, I had a memory, recollection, felt sense of them. And they would come and they would take turns on me and I would re-experience it all rolling around. So there was something that I had that information at the start of the talk, the first hour or so of the treatment. And in some ways it continued like the first treatment. It was just a bit of a different setup, but I was being raped, there was multiple people. I was rolling about, felt uncomfortable, I was sweating profusely, and I also remember my tongue was going crazy, like just my tongue was moving and shifting out of my mouth in all these different angles. That's something, just quickly backtracking a bit. After the first MDMA treatment, I remember going to my men's group and saying, they knew that I'd had it, and I was like, yeah, I've got this thing with my jaw. And before I could finish saying what I was going to say, they were like, gurning. Yeah, I remember gurning. I used to gurn when I took MDMA as a teenager. And in my mind, I was like, no, it's not gurning. But they were like, yeah. And they had a chat amongst themselves for a while. And then I kind of broke it to them of like, well, no, I was actually reliving being raped. And what I was trying to say is that I could feel my jaw being wrenched open by something. But people have these associations with MDMA and these ideas about it, and I've had that put on me. I've had these memories ridiculed because of it's MDMA, it's just all the delusion or it's whatever. Obviously that's not my experience or my belief, but yeah, I just wanted to touch back on that. But yeah, so the second treatment, I was aware of other people, I was aware I had a main handler, rolling around being raped, but then something happened that I hadn't re-experienced yet, or I hadn't seen the wisdom of the body working in this way. And basically, I started speaking words, and these words came out of my mouth in a different pitch and a different tone, in a tonality I did not recognize. And it was, the first sentence was, "It's not your fault, I just couldn't help it." But I'll try and recall the tonality. It was like, "It's not your fault, I just couldn't help it. It's not your fault, I just couldn't help it." And then I'd be here and I'd be, "It's not your fault, I just couldn't help it." So that was the tonality of it. So that continued for a while, but then the language pattern changed. Then it changed to, "It's not your fault, you made me do it." Then it changed to, "It's all your fault, you made me do it." So these words are just coming out of me. I'm kind of like, where the fuck is this coming from? Had no frame of reference for this. It felt quite shocking, and I didn't even understand how I was speaking words that I had no idea were inside me. It was as if my body was some kind of audio recorder that was just repeating some imprint that I had. And it felt really disturbing. Like, I could tell, I mean, I've done NLP and hypnosis training, so I know what pacing and leading, or like, it was like hypnotic suggestion, or it was conditioning. So yeah, it had gone from, "It's not your fault, I just couldn't help it," to, "It's all your fault, you made me do it." And then it became, "You made me do it, you dirty little boy, and you love it, don't you?" And then I would feel myself strangled. So I'd literally be laid there rolling about, and I would feel my throat constrict as if there was a hand around it. I would be choking, and he would be choking me and then asking, "You like it, don't you?" And then if I was able to be like, "Yes, yes, yes," or nod, then he'd release it and he'd say, "Good boy." But he would do this language pattern, reinforcing it with strangulation to make sure that I complied, or was verbally complying with what he said. So, but it just continued, and it just got worse and it got worse. The next sort of evolution of things was he, in my reliving of it, he sort of pointed to the outside, and he was like, there was a group of men there, I could feel a group of men there watching me, and there was one in particular that fucking terrified me. I looked at him in my invisible seeing, remembering, and I felt dread go through my body. Like, I was fucking terrified of him. Yeah, just rev the noise. But I think it'll be okay on these mics, won't it?
Yeah,
it's
fine. Yeah.
Sorry, there's just a noise outside. So he then started saying, "These people don't want to let you go. They don't trust that you're not going to tell on us, so they want to kill you. You're not going to tell on us, are you, Daniel? Good boy." But they don't believe that. And then it evolved into, if you tell anyone, they'll kill you. Then they'll do this to your mummy and daddy. Then they'll do this to your brother. And then they will kill them as well. You don't want that, do you, Daniel? No, you don't want that. Then I relived the one that terrified me, the one that I came to call the beast. I relived him raping me. That was fucking awful. Compared to him, I was like, and this is how I've learned how these sophisticated paedophiles can operate. Because by being raped by the beast that was so horrific and so rough and so brutal, it made me yearn for my handler, who was relatively speaking kind, compassionate, compared to what the beast was like. So they are very good at conditioning and training you to almost like a good cop, bad cop routine, where you're, by creating that contrast, you're leaning towards one of them as opposed to pushing back from both of them. You know, from what I've relived, I was a pretty tough kid. I was pretty like, fuck you. But it was so overwhelming. I was like reaching out to this other man as in like, please come and rape me so I don't have to suffer it from him. Which is potentially quite a vulnerable or conflicting thing to share, you know? And it's stuff like this where they start saying, well, you want it. See, you want it, don't you? You really want it because you're asking me to come to you. So that's come out in other layers of stuff that I've relived as well. But yeah, so this continued for a while. This sums up the heart of the second treatment. Yeah. Relived myself being passed around with lots of other people. It was some kind of orgy with me at the centre of it, or so I thought. There was the beast, there was this other group of friends, and then I also got a flash of a man whose face I recognised, and I knew his name. So at that point I was like, okay, I know roughly how old I am, and I know where I am. And when I was younger, we lived in Nigeria for maybe 3 years on and off, from the age of about 3 till 6. And so I had an idea that I was about 5.5 years old when this was going on. It was only an idea. I don't know for sure how old I was, but the face of the person that I recognised that I'm consciously not naming. Should I name them? I can say his first name, can't I? I can say his first name. So pretty sure he's called. And I reckon like this round, red face, beard. I can't even remember if he had fucking hair. But anyway, I recognised him and I was like, that's fucking. Exactly. So that was like, gave me an anchor into the real world, and it made me able to kind of locate when and where roughly within that 3-year period it was happening. And I was like, there's no way I'm 3 years old, like a 3-year-old. This is too extreme for, so from a feeling and just figuring it out, I was like, I think I'm about 5.5 years old was what I could kind of get to. So this went on for 6 hours. And as it started to wrap up, the facilitator went out to get me a drink. She'd been force feeding me water throughout the treatment as well, just to make sure I didn't dehydrate because I was sweating so much. But as she went out of the room and I was kind of just laid there recovering on the floor, I looked over to the sofa and I had the impression of a girl. There was a girl sat on the sofa and she was wearing a white dress. And I think there was blood, but I was just like a flash. And I was like, huh. And then the facilitator came back and I was like, oh, facilitator, I saw a girl sat on the sofa. I saw a girl sat on the sofa. Like, what does that mean? What does that mean? And it's like, it's real, like, what? Like, I saw her, she was sat there, really clearly. So like this, what I've shared from the first and the second treatment, so far, I'm as sure as I can be that definitely happened. What I'm about to describe, I still am pretty damn sure happened, but it enters the realm of disbelievability. So it continued. Like after the first treatment, I ended up having some food, having some time to recover. I was smoking back in those days, so I had a few cigarettes to try and ground myself. And then I went to bed. I was exhausted and I couldn't sleep. And then laid in bed, it started happening again. And I just started reliving being raped again. And it went on for hours and hours and hours and hours. But what was different in the evening as I was reliving it is I was aware of the presence of a girl. And it was as if she was off to this side. And I was reliving what I'd already relived, that earlier treatment. Does that make sense? But I was reliving another layer of it with the girl being present. And I knew, I don't know how I knew, but I knew that she died. And the image that I had was that, like, she got her head caved in with a hammer or something. But I also knew that image wasn't real, that it was protecting me from something far worse. So that information came to me through the reliving of things. So in the evening, throughout this long night, over many hours of reliving it again and again, I got a bit clearer on details. I was like, okay, I was raped. So I think I was raped about, I think it was by five or six different people in my behind. I think I was raped in my mouth by about 8 or 9 people. My handler was there. Then the beast came over. Okay. And then the girl was there and she was being raped alongside me as well. I became aware that at some point when she was being raped, I reached out towards her and I looked towards her and I tried to be strong, and I tried to be strong for her. And I just remember we were just looking across to each other. I was reaching out with an arm to her while we were both being raped across from each other on some kind of table or something. At some point, I re-experienced them picking her up and sitting them on top of me, and just hearing this incredible jeering and this incredible pressure trying to get us to do something together, to I don't know, to copulate, to enact sex together. And at some point as I relived it, I was fucking terrified that I'd actually gone along with what they were saying. Go on, do it, oh yeah, ooh. It was this kind of like this wave, I just felt this energy, this intense energy of, and I was like, oh no, what if I did, what if I went along with that? Because I knew that was wrong. And then I had this, almost like a mushroom bloom of like realization of like, God, no, we didn't go along with it. We didn't go along with it. And I just remember us holding on to each other, clinging on to each other, these 2 beautiful children, like shining light, surrounded by impossible darkness. And then they tore her away from me. So that's the end of the second treatment. I knew that she died at that point, but I didn't relive how. How are we doing for time?
We're doing good.
Doing good. So I managed to get about an hour and a half sleep, and I woke up early, had a couple of smokes, made myself a coffee. The facilitator was still asleep, as all of this was done at her house, basically. It was fully facilitated. But I could feel stuff in my system, so I went downstairs and I laid out on the lounge floor again. And I just I think I picked up from that evolving ancestors ceremony that I'd done previously I think I spoke like, ancestors, protect me, guide me, help me. And it just started happening. So I started reliving being raped again, but this was a particular rape that I came to call the last breaking. So in this last breaking, it was very clear straight away that she was dead. And it was very clear that I was very angry, and it was also very clear that it was the beast that was raping me. Now, it was a horrendous rape that I relived. My body was being folded in half, so compressed up together. So I was being anally raped with my head being pulled up through my own legs so that I couldn't breathe, or I could barely breathe when I was being raped. Obviously my head wouldn't reach up through my legs, but that's how it was being pulled. It was vicious. As I was reliving it, like my whole body was kind of like just smashing across the floor. And then I keep saying, like, you killed her, I fucking hate you, you killed her, you shouldn't have killed her, she was just a little girl. She was just a little girl. You shouldn't have done that, that was so wrong. And I was arguing with them. And I just knew, like this is what I was doing back then. Like, I was fucking telling them, I was like, and I think I was saying, I'm gonna kill you. I think I was saying, like, I'm gonna kill you. I was like, you fucking killed her, that was wrong. She was just a little girl. What are you doing? After this last breaking that lasted a couple of hours of me reliving it, and then after about 2 hours I'd had enough. Or maybe it was an hour actually, but anyway, it felt like 2 hours. I finished. I had to wait for a certain amount of time for the MDMA to run out so that I was safe to drive, so it wasn't in my system anymore. And then I drove home. And one thing I remember on the drive home is I had anger, rage dump like I've never experienced. I was driving and I was literally like, you fucking killed her. And I was like that for about the 4-hour drive home. Like the whole time, the rage that I felt, I was shaking. I had like heat radiating off me. It was extreme. And I just know that if I made it up, I wouldn't have felt emotion to that extreme. Yeah, it was fucking intense, man. But anyway, I also knew it was a storm, so I knew that I had to kind of hold on and just get through that, and I did. But then the next day, when the next day came, I could just feel my system was active. So I knew that I had to relive, and I basically every day that week I went into it again and I relived it for about 2 hours a day of every day that week, and a lot happened. On one of those days I relived the orgy rape, but this time there was a sexual energy present. I could feel that I was almost drugged, and I could feel myself coming out of what felt like a drug state in what I was reliving. But I was aware of, like, my God, I was in bliss. I was in ecstasy. I was in like orgasmic heaven in a way, but then I had this growing, horrible sense that something was really terribly wrong. And then like just becoming aware again of these people raping me. So that was horrifying. Just the realization that I could enjoy on some level, or that my body could enjoy it on some level. And that caused me a lot of difficulty. And from other experiences that I've relived, you know, my understanding is that the body can just freeze. And unfortunately, a child body can respond, and then it creates this horrible guilt and this horrible shame in the child, because it's as if the body has betrayed you. And then the abusers use this against you to say, like, well, look, you came, or you had an orgasm, or you had a special moment. You like it, don't you? Do you see why I'm doing this to you? I'm doing it for your own good. These are themes I played through in later dates. But probably the worst day of that week of me reliving things on my own in the spare room, probably the worst day is when I relived them killing the girl. And I guess I'll talk us through that a bit, if that's okay. So it was the same orgy, it was the same them sitting her on top of me, then tearing her away. It was that same gestalt. What was different about it this time? It was just in more detail. It was intense. It was intense, man. Like my jaw, just like the tension in my jaw as it was wrenched open, or just like the pain that I felt down here, or the way that my body arched. I guess it's possible that I just relived a rape, that there was a girl there that was raped, and that they made me think that she was killed, or that I imagined that she was killed, or that I was afraid that she was killed. But what I relived really makes out that they killed her, and they killed her terribly, like extremely. So what became clear was that me and this girl had been quietly defying them in the time building up to this particular act. So we were a bit like naughty kids in their eyes that hadn't been playing the game that they wanted us to play. I remember reliving being raped. I remember them sitting her on top of me and then taking her away. I remember watching the beast actually rape her as she was across from me on the other table, and raping her horrifically, and me being forced to watch while I was also raped. I remember there was a woman who was stood at some kind of bar over at the far wall, and I remember her walking over. And maybe it's delusion, man, but I relived being possessed by Wolf. I relived Wolf telling them, like, don't do this, please don't do this, do not do this. You're like children playing in the dark with things that you don't understand. Please don't do this. And I relived the woman walk over. And I relived me being laid on my front, being raped from behind, a belt across my jaw. And somebody took my eyes and they held my eyes open. I could feel it. I could feel my eyes being held open. And I was made to watch. And the woman, with the girl laid on her back, the woman looked at me, looked at the girl, looked at me, and then she had a knife and she cut the girl's throat, and then she cut down the front of the girl's body. I remember I was shaking my head a lot like this. I was shaking my head and I was really trying to say no. I think I screamed, but the scream wouldn't come out, and I was just shaking my head. But I couldn't shake my head because they had my head held and they held my eyes open. I think the woman said something about cutting her open like a butterfly. And I think as she cut her down the front, she peeled her open. And then it gets even more unbelievable, even more fantastical. Because I saw the woman cut her heart out. And I saw the woman cut a piece of her heart away, and that was force-fed to me. That was force-fed to me. I remember being laid there, fighting it, my mouth being forced open, my throat being stroked, fighting it, a hand over my mouth so I couldn't breathe, so I was forced to swallow, while my throat was being stroked. I have no idea how I'd made this up, man. I have no idea how I would make this up. I relived my soul escaping my body. I relived, so I was just kind of laid there at this point, and I was like, okay, well, I'm not in my body anymore. Like, the images that I had came quite quickly, and I saw myself. It's like I was in the sky. I saw the girl. Her heart was missing. I was worried she wasn't okay. We got carried aloft. There was these golden beings, and they carried us away. And I tried to look down, but they stopped me from looking down at my body, and we flew off into the air. So I'd never had an experience like this at this point. It felt pretty fucking real. As we were flying up through the air, my soul, my spirit being taken away, I relived a couple of things happened quite quickly. I had a sense, feeling, sight of a golden place that was beautiful, that was safe, and it was as if I was there, but I wasn't. But then at the same time, I had a feeling, or I saw a couple of things. I saw here shadows within shadows, moving shadows that terrified me, that fucking terrified me. I saw this light come down from above, and I knew that the shadows were somehow part of God. They were part of him, but they still fucking terrified me. And then it was like a black ball or a black sun, and it seemed to move across the curvature of the earth towards me. And as we fled, I know what this sounds like, guys, but as we fled, a tentacle of this thing whipped out and reached around my left leg. And as it did, I felt darkness go through my entire body. Now, what I relived on this occasion, I returned to my body. I also relived, oh, for God's sake. Is that okay? Are we doing okay?
You're fine.
Yeah. I think it was on this occasion I also relived. Or maybe it was a later one. Maybe it was a later occasion actually, but after they brought me back, or after I'd come back, I was furious, and I was telling them, you shouldn't have killed her. You shouldn't have killed her. She was just a little girl. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? Why would you do that? What's wrong with you? She was just a little girl. The beast had me, and he held me down, and he had a knife, the same knife that they'd used to kill her, and he held it up. He got my hand, and he wrapped my hand around the knife with his hand over the top, his fucking giant slab-like hand. He was literally a beast of a man. He was huge, and he had this rage that would seem to make the room shake. He hated being defied. He hated me defying him. He held the knife at my throat, and he said, I could kill you at any time, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. You're so weak. You're so pathetic. He then held the knife at his own throat, and he said, you want to kill me, don't you? You want to kill me, but you can't. You're too weak. You're too small. There's nothing you can do. I then relived the sound of a baby crying, and as I looked over in, I don't know, how did I see it? I didn't see it, but I saw it. A baby was carried over and placed down next to me. And this baby was softly crying. I haven't talked about this for a long time. The beast, with his hand around my hand, forced me to stab that baby to death. And then, oh my God, Daniel, what have you done? Oh my God, Daniel, what have you done? You killed that baby. You killed that poor baby. In another day of that week of me reliving different gestalts or different aspects of that gestalt, I relived a closing ceremony where they were conditioning me. And I had my handler in front of me, and it was as if he had my head and he was moving my head, and he was like, oh God, what was it? You didn't mean for that to happen, did you, Daniel? No. He'd move my head, no. But there's something really bad inside you, isn't there, Daniel? Yes, he'd shake my head, yes. You didn't mean to do it, did you? But you lost control. There's something really bad inside you. There's something really bad inside you. It made you do it. It made you do it, and we're trying to get that darkness out of you, Daniel. We're trying to make it so you can be loved again, so you can go back to your mummy and daddy. And this continued. It was an hour or two long process again, but I relived this weird hypnotic conditioning. Again, I had the sense that I was drugged in some way, but it was like some kind of ritual, and there was a way he was speaking it that felt so practiced. He was almost, you know, when someone just is used to answering the phone and they sound almost a bit bored of it. It sounded like there was an arrogance, like he knew he was good at what he did, but there was an over familiarity with it as well. So it's like he knew these lines and he knew them well, or he knew how to speak like this really well. And yeah, you didn't mean to do this, but you did. You did it. You lost control. You did something terrible. You killed her. Then you killed a baby. Oh my God, Daniel, you did that. God, you know, you're evil. You're the most terrible boy, but we're trying to save you. We're trying to save you. So this is what I relived. And then what I relived is that I was returned to my family at some point after this. So that's the core of the second MDMA treatment. Have some coffee. There's maybe a particular week I want to talk about, and then the third MDMA treatment, and then I think we can have a break. Is that okay?
Yeah. What
is the time out of interest?
It's been 1 hour 30.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay, yeah. Yeah, you guys doing okay? Yeah, go, mate.
I just want to say that I believe you.
Thank you, brother.
And thank you for your courage in reliving and sharing. I think is very powerful.
Yeah, thank you, brother. Yeah, it felt so real, you know. And with what we're going to talk about later, I've maintained with professional services I've been involved with, I've maintained that I believe this happened. They probably are more on the side of thinking it's delusion. But I know there was delusion, there absolutely was delusion that came in, but I don't think this is it. This was at the beginning, it was so fresh, it was so pure. it was relived through my body, and it happened so fucking quickly. Yeah.
There's two things I'd like to touch to, but
Yeah.
maybe you're gonna
Perfect.
approach them in the second and third part, and then where you want to go. But I think what's really important is for people to understand the surrounding that you were in terms of what kind of people were these people.
Okay. Yeah.
What were the places where this was happening?
Nice. Yeah.
And why were people gathering? What was their ideology? If you want to share some of it.
Yeah, well, look, I can describe. So we lived in Nigeria. We were expats. My dad worked quite high up in a company of out in Nigeria. We were part of an expat community. Is all I kind of knew, really. You know, we lived in a big house with a wall, and we had guards, and we had guard dogs. We were considered we were wealthy, I suppose. But I spoke, after I'd had this second MDMA treatment, I waited until the second MDMA treatment. I waited until several weeks had passed. So at this point I was reliving it every day. All in all, I relived hundreds of hours, but a lot of that was delusion. But over the next year or two, I lived hundreds of hours of this stuff that gradually became more and more delusional. I waited until the second MDMA treatment, and then a couple of weeks after that before I started approaching this with my parents. And I kept, I was trying to protect them. I was trying, at this point, I just thought my parents aren't involved. It was like friends of the family. I'd seen face, so I was like, he still look after us, so like he's taken me somewhere and this has happened, and was my thinking really. So he was a friend of the family. I spoke to my mum and my dad and my brothers, and I tried to say, I showed them footage from the first treatment, and I'd gone through it with them slowly of like, look, what do you think this is? And I tried to do it in a way that protected the identity of the facilitator. They thought that was me being controlling or something. But anyway, I eventually was like, well, look, that's me reliving being raped, and I think something happened to me when I was a kid. I think I was raped by 2 or 3 people. That's what I kind of opened with. So I didn't go in saying all of this stuff has happened. But, my dad straight away was like, well, that's impossible, Daniel. That could never happen. And my mum was like, well, you need to speak to your dad about it, was always her kind of response. But one thing I had asked my mum was like, Mum, look, was there anything like that going on around up there? Now, she said to me that she knew of expats that were raping or sleeping with underage African girls in Nigeria, which is obviously rape. So apparently that was part of the climate out there. But I was young, I was a kid, I didn't know. Does that answer? Does that give a bit more?
I think you had mentioned that there was like a camp or something like that.
Okay, yeah. So I had a sense that it was some kind of, where this rape orgy had happened was like the culmination ceremony of some kind of holiday camp or school, or over a period of days. There was a sense I was able to get, but I couldn't really get anything specific on it, really. It just was like some kind of something like that.
And in terms of the setting in which it happened?
Yeah, I didn't really get that many details, really. didn't really get that many details. In later gestalts or later layers of that gestalt that I relived, I did relive seeing like masks, so like horned masks, goat masks, skull masks with horns, golden masks, things like that, like them wearing that at different times in the lead up to it, and then everyone just getting naked basically. So I have relived that at a later time that seemed to be around that gestalt. There also just seemed to be a theme of aggravating the child before death occurred. Tormenting the child before death occurred seemed to be a theme, like looking back on it.
So from what I understand, you're talking about a group of men and women who would gather for orgies where they would want to destroy the child to the point of death for certain of them.
I guess so, yeah. Yeah, I guess so.
And was there any chanting or
Not
anything?
that I can remember.
No.
Not that I can remember, no.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I can remember. Not that I relived at that point, at least.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I had in later layers of Gestalt, I had stuff come up, but I think could have been on the verge of delusion. So I wouldn't. What I'm sharing is about the core, the heart of things that I feel. I mean, at later dates, I really lived stuff that sounded like. I don't even want to say it really.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel confident, and so I wouldn't want to say.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? It's a bit.
Yeah. The parts that had some tonalities of the cross and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
Is that something that you remember?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, so it's around the similar thing, but I relived in different layers. There was something like at one point I was held down in this kind of position, and I felt something stab into my side, and I remember I was, what the fuck is that? Like that was really vivid. I relived at one point preceding a rape, being massaged and like a bright light and being praised and being told how almost golden and wonderful and beautiful I was, and this really sickening massage, and I guess being compared, dare I say it, to the Christ basically as a child, which sounds really weird to say. But I relived that at a later time. Does that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I probably won't say that if that's okay. Probably won't say that if that's okay. Yeah. But yeah, there was, well, yeah. There definitely seemed to be a theme of like, I can't remember anything being said about Christianity or the devil specifically until later gestalts where I'm just not sure if I was in delusion or not, or if that was just the fantasy starting to take over. And look, I'm with my story, what I've just described, I'm open to these recollections of the girl. I'm open to the possibility, probably a strong possibility, probably a probability that it's delusion. Like I'm really open to that. But just when I talk about it, it feels very real. But what I'm almost certain about is what I described before that. Like that for me is as concrete as I'm going to get with like, that happened, that happened. Yeah.
So when you did speak to your brother and your father,
yeah, well, it kind of escalated a bit of just my mother was being really weird, and I ended up saying to her like, "Mum, why are you being like this? Like, I'm reliving being raped on a daily basis now. why are you not coming down to see me? Or why are you not calling me to see if I'm okay? Why is there just no compassion or anything coming? And I ended up leaving a voice message on her phone saying like, look, mum, come on, you're my mum, like, come and support me or something, come on. And she ended up playing that voice message to her family, and there seemed to be a narrative about me of how controlling I was. And yeah, it was under the narrative of me being controlling, apparently. But I basically didn't hear anything from that entire side of the family, and things got very difficult with my brothers. And I think with my mum, I just chose to cut her off at that point, really. When I learned from one of my brothers that she'd shared that with the rest of the family, like people had listened to this voice message of me saying like, Mum, where are you? Why are you not here? Yeah, it was really, really hurtful. It was really hurtful. And then my dad was just like, Daniel, this is impossible. This never could have happened. Like, you're making it up. At this point, I hadn't told them that I'd taken MDMA therapy. I just told them that I'd undergone alternative therapy. But when he learned that it was MDMA therapy, he was like, come on, it's MDMA. It's all delusional. You're just making this up. And, you know, it's a figment of your imagination. Which sometimes, you know, like all survivors I know of struggle with, like, did this happen? Mm-hmm. Is this real? I think because of the severity of mine, I get that and then some. But all survivors get that. But what I was struggling with was I had, you know, I don't know if I've embodied it or like presented it, but like it was visceral, man. It was real. It wasn't just me sat there like, oh, I'm getting an image of me being raped as a child. I was reliving it. Do you know what I mean? It was, when I relived that girl being murdered in the way that I just described most recently, I was bereft, man. I was doubled over with grief. Like, it's almost like I was reliving her death again. With the stuff that I relived later, just didn't have that emotion that I would say was delusional. It didn't have that emotional weight. Does that make sense?
Did you remember your family taking part?
That's the third MDMA treatment, really. So should we jump to that one? Yeah, so the third MDMA treatment we actually did back at my home, because I think at this point the facilitator was getting a bit tired of me making loads of noise in our house and disturbing the neighbours. Sorry. But we did it at my place. It didn't feel as grounded in some ways or as set up as well as it could have been, but there was really just one main thing that I took away from it. But before we get to it, actually, there's a bit more that I'll say. So between each treatment, am I still in view okay?
Yeah.
So between each treatment, there was about 4 or 5 weeks. So in the 4 to 5 weeks after the second treatment, I had that week I just described. I had another week in which I basically boarded up the whole house and I was processing trauma for about 10 to 12 hours a day. During that week, I had 2 full days of reliving and then replaying fight survival energy. So I would be reliving it, but then my body would start making my breathing pattern would change, and I'd start moving almost robotically. And then it was like I was trying to break out of the holds and the positions I was in, and then I would break free, and then I would fight, and I would role play fighting, killing these invisible assailants. So, you know, the bed in the spare room got a good punch in, and a few pillows got torn up, and a door got smashed, you know, and I relived rescuing the girl on one, not relived, but kind of role played rescuing the girl. So, and on one occasion, as I relived escaping, I ran out of the house, ran out the garden, jumped over the garden fence and ran to the far corner of the field. And I was like, yes, you know, like there was a couple of days that was about completing that fight energy, that flight energy, that freeze energy. I had 2 days where I relived the encounter with the demiurge, with this black sun that I described. And for 2 days and 2 nights, I was there, and I was just laid in bed, and I just had the image of these golden angels around me, and they were so gently teasing these black tendrils out of me that this black sun had somehow got in my leg, and then it had expanded and grown through every cavity, every trauma break in my body. These tentacles, these tendrils, and these golden beings were unwinding and pulling them out of me. And with each tendril that got pulled out of my body, a lie got dispelled. So like, I'm disgusting, or I deserve to die. Every time I felt something come out, like a lie got undone. And it was amazing. I don't even know how to describe it really, but I felt like angels were, I was either reliving angels working on me, or they were working on me then, you know? Bit of fear. But then what I also relived leading up to the third treatment is I started reliving other gestalts leading up to that gestalt. I could tell it was going back in time. I just knew it was going back in time. And in the lead up to it, it seemed this group of men had access to me in the run up to this event, this special party, this school, this whatever the fuck it was, this special party. And one of the themes that got played out in these, there was other events when they were raping me. There was an event when a fucking dog was involved, but I won't go into that now. But what's probably most on target right now is they would try to get me to abuse my younger brother. And at the time I was like, God knows how they've got access to us, but they just, you know, I was just going with it. And they would tie me up. They would hold me in place. They would hold my brother against me. They would force us to make it look like we were doing things. Polaroids would be taken. Then at a later time, I'd be shown the Polaroids and I'd be like, look, Daniel, you've done it. Why not just do it again? Why not just do it again? And I'd be like, no, I'm not doing it. But that theme played out quite extensively, and that was horrifying. Like the idea that I could have abused my brother, or even under duress, was just absolutely horrifying to me. And that kind of leads on to the third MDMA treatment, really, that really the heart of that is I'd taken the medicine, I was laid on the bed, I had about half an hour where I was just laid there and I was just in, my God, what if I've abused my brothers? What if I've abused other children? What if, as an adult, I've abused children and I'm not even aware of it? What if I'm what I fear the most? What if I'm that? It was awful. It was absolutely awful. I was saying this to the facilitator. In my mind, I was like, if it's fucking true, I'll kill myself. I didn't say it to the facilitator, but I was like, God. But I just couldn't feel any kind of truth. I was just lost in this, oh my God, what if I've done that? What if I've abused my brothers? What if I've abused other children? Like, what if as an adult, I've abused children? Just this horrible, like, just lost blur. And then after a while, it was half an hour, maybe 40 minutes, I think, from looking back at the footage. And after a while, I started finding my voice again, and then it just started coming up, and it was like, no, I know I'd never do that. And as I gradually found my voice again, and I was just like, oh, thank God, I know that I didn't. Thank God, I know that I didn't. And I know children that have, or adults that were children that have in those kind of situations, and I don't actually think there's any shame on them for that. But for me, in those situations, from what I can tell, I don't think I fucking broke by some miracle under God, or from help from Wolf, or from some angel. But I don't think I complied under duress. And then as that became clear, suddenly my father's face came into view. And in all these gestalts that I'd relived of me being forced against my brother, my father was there. It was like a shadow with these other figures that suddenly came into perspective. And I felt such fear and such terror in remembering him. Like I, as a grown man, like I'm not scared of my dad. You know, he's again, I'm not saying I'm a tough guy, but he's just not my equal physically. Like I've been in scrapes and stuff as a grown man, and I can relatively handle myself, and I just, in no logical way am I afraid of him. But I was fucking terrified of him as I relived, as he came into focus. I felt such fear and terror. And then after that treatment, I relived a lot, and he was in focus again. He was in focus, and he was there from the very beginning, and he was my core abuser. And he's very clever, very clever, very... My mum would describe him as like, he's always changing what's acceptable and what's not. He's always playing games that you can never win. I relive stuff that he was incredibly sadistic, and yeah, he's my core abuser. And then it just, certain things made sense, like how the abusers had access to me, that kind of thing. I guess it's possible that I made that up because I didn't want to face that maybe I was an abuser myself, but I don't think that's the case. No, it just, the fear and the terror that I felt when I saw his face and I realised him and I saw him and I had images of him or images of part of him, and the revulsion, the sickness, the self-loathing, the hatred, I don't think I could have made that up. And that's probably a good place to leave part one. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for taking the time to share your testimony, which I believe will help many men,
Really?
many survivors.
I'd like it to. I'd like it to.
And not just survivors of CSA or SRA, but any kind of survivor that has overcome the circumstances that they had to face. And where chains will be broken.
Yeah. Amen to that, brother.
Yeah.
Amen to that.
So we'll see you in part 2.
Oh, God. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, August.
Thank you, Daniel.